This whole business is based on relationship and friendships.
Food is darn simple.
What can we do? What are other countries doing?
How important it is for industry to be talking about this.
We're going back to the farm. We're going back to the whole food.
Welcome, everyone, to the CPMA podcast with John Stackhouse. John, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And listen, interesting times, and everyone turns around and starts asking the question, what would a bank be doing at a produce convention? What's the interest? Why is RBC even here talking to us?
We love food, love farmers, love everyone who is involved in the creation of food for not just for social reasons, but it's a critical part of our economy. One of the first, I oversee RBC's thought leadership, which is designed to help Canada get on the right track for prosperity well into the 2030s. And over the last decade, we've developed a number of research streams, but deliberately focused on agriculture as part of that. It's a significant growth engine for the country. That's something I stress in every conversation I get to have, particularly with government leaders. Agriculture strategy is economic strategy. We're now talking about economic strategy and as being part of national security. Well, agriculture is part of national security. We're getting a really concerning, and I'm sure we'll get into this, wake-up call to that now, and maybe we need that to understand how food production is something we all get to take, or most of us get to take for granted. Yeah. So thank you for all of you who allow us to take for granted. But it's also core to the economic growth and prosperity of the country. And then something I also have been stressing to audiences for years is, because I've had the privilege of being able to talk to Canadians in every corner of the country over decades. Agriculture is the one thing that stitches every corner of this country together. You cannot turn a corner in this country without coming across not just people who are selling food products, but people who are involved in the creation and distribution of those food products, which I think is wonderful. We live in a country where agri-food is everywhere.
So, and it's funny you mention that, because I know the industry is complex. The Canadian consumer thinks of one piece. I am buying my apple, my leafy greens, my tomatoes from the grocery store. They got it from the farmer. They don't understand the business complexity of inputs into the farming community, how those inputs get there, and the economic engines that have to happen just to put potash and other tools into the market.
Yeah, well, you asked what's a bank doing here. So we bank tens of thousands of farmers right across the country and food producers, and are very grateful for that opportunity. But we also bank and engage with firms right through the distribution system. So I've been able to spend time with really interesting clients around Pearson Airport in Toronto, for example. Yeah. People don't realize that is a major food manufacturing hub. And then the complexities of getting the food to those plants and to the warehouses and then onto planes, trains, and trucks to go to all sorts of markets. Really cool to study, but also gets back to that point of this is, if you had to list the 5 most critical sectors to Canada's economy and to our prospects for the 2030s, agri-food is absolutely on that kind of all-star team.
You know what? And this is what's crazy. We live it every day, and we know we're great, right, gang? Are we great? Yes. But the rest of the world doesn't realize we're great until you have a crisis, right? And we're living through turbulent times. We're seeing volatility. And our old world of volatility was a hurricane, a lack of water, a flood, recently, logistics issues, whether Suez Canal, Panama Canal, whether the Montreal port, the Vancouver port. Now throw geopolitical on top of that. So with the volatility, we're seeing erratic market shifts. How are you seeing that impacting everyone in this room within the produce sector?
Well, let's maybe start at a high level and then come down to the produce sector. So we are in an extraordinary period of volatility and uncertainty. Those are two sides of the same coin right now. We last saw this level of volatility in markets during the pandemic. And then the last time before that was during the global financial crisis. So what we are in and have been in over the last week is equivalent to what we were in the pandemic and the financial crisis. Those had long tail effects that we need to start thinking about and be attuned to. But this volatility is also very different. The first one was caused by a systemic crisis. Yeah. The second one by a virus. The third by a single policy envelope driven by a single country. The good news is that policy envelope can be reversed or amended much more easily than a virus can be eradicated. So that's my optimistic scenario, and we can get into the probabilities of that. We've seen a swift, sharp decline in equities, stock prices. We should also keep an eye on what's happening in the bond market. Yeah. We're seeing pretty concerning sell-off in bonds. That's leading to higher yields. We'll all pay for that in our mortgages, in your commercial paper, in your term loans, and in our government debt and what we have to pay on that. This may be resolved by the time the podcast airs, but that's an important part of the volatility to keep in mind. Yeah. What we aren't seeing right now is any systemic challenge in terms of liquidity. Liquidity is there, and I was a newspaper editor during the global financial crisis. It gummed up fast, and that's why the auto companies suddenly were on the brink of insolvency because they couldn't get the funds from the system to meet payroll, but to pay their suppliers. And as you all know, we all live in a very integrated economy, but integrated financial system. Yeah. So you put a wall in any part of that, and the whole thing is at risk of shutting down. We're not seeing that now. And as we saw in the pandemic, our central banks, our commercial banks, our governments have playbooks on how to manage this. And
are those playbooks working though?
Well, they haven't need to be implemented the way they were in the pandemic because that was an immediate shutdown of the economy. And we're not seeing that now. We're seeing uncertainty. We're seeing in markets a bit of a buyer's strike. People are not wanting to invest in the market. The capital is there. There's an enormous amount of capital sitting on sidelines. And if that uncertainty can be resolved, that capital should come into markets pretty quickly. In other words, there's not a systemic challenge that needs a systemic solution. There's just uncertainty because of trade policies that has everyone tightening up.
So light at the end of the tunnel. The challenge is how far deep is that tunnel to get us to that light? And I go back to the question on the volatility you talked to. A lot of businesses that are listening are sitting here going, all right, do I invest? Where and how do I leverage the necessary capital to innovate? Am I expanding? Am I holding off relative to market uncertainty? And in produce, we have the old saying, sell it or smell it. And predictability is key. I want to jump into the big elephant on the podcast in the room, and it is the president, right? So on the global trading landscape, we're seeing that changing minute to minute, hour by hour, day by day, relative to the agenda that we're coming out of the U.S. administration. President Trump is driving radical change for everyone. So how do you see that global landscape shifting and impacting all of us?
We need more clarity on what the objectives are of the administration and a bit of what its strategy is. And I wouldn't expect them to give away their negotiating strategy, but an understanding of kind of what are the key things that they want to get at this year and then longer term. What you're feeling, every sector is feeling, which is this uncertainty and therefore an understandable decision or instinct to hold back on investing. So anyone thinking of starting a new factory line is probably holding back now, of doing an M&A transaction, probably holding back, thinking about what to plant this spring, maybe pulling back. That's where it starts to get very concerning because of the lead times. You all know this, are very significant. We're not talking days, weeks, we're talking seasons in agri-food as well as other sectors. And I think the administration is hearing this from a lot of people they respect, including U.S. farmers, that more certainty is needed so that those U.S. farmers can know what to plant this spring. And their buyers, not just in the United States, but around the world, can have some certainty and do forward contracts and arrange for shipping and everything else that goes into that. If we don't get that certainty, then we're going to see more structural impacts, not just market volatility, but people pulling back from significant long-term investments. And then we'll get into next fall, next year, and find ourselves in a recession, I think, which a good number of people are now forecasting.
I think they're forecasting fairly aggressively.
Yeah, and that you don't snap your way out of that kind of a recession when you've had that sort of structural lack of investment. It's not a consumer-driven recession where you can just get people coming back in, which is what we saw after 9/11 as an example. People just get scared, hold back, then have comfort and go back into the market. This could be more structural.
So global trade flows. And talking about market volatility, talking about currencies on a global level, the strength of the Federal Reserve, which in the U.S. is foundational on global trading. The Trump strategy, like what are the worst case scenarios? Are there any best case scenarios coming out of what we're seeing currently? And you're right, no one has a crystal ball. No one knows what the president is thinking in the U.S. It seems to change every day, but is there a pattern? Is there an opportunity, or is it doom and gloom?
No, it's not doom and gloom. I think we're seeing signals of what could become the worst case scenario, which is a rapid escalation of a trade war between the world's two dominant economies, China and the United States. We've not seen the global economy dominated by two economies the way it is now, roughly half of global GDP with two economies. We've not seen that very often in history. If those two economies, which have a very integrated economies, but also integrated financial flows, get beyond a point of no return, that will have enduring negative impacts for all of us. Now, a better outlook is that they both, in their self-interest, dial this down. And probably need, and I don't know where this comes from, but typically when you've got two parties really going at it, you need a mediator of some kind, someone to come in and pull them together and say, look, what do you really need? What do you really need? And then dial it down. That kind of signal would be helpful. I think the other optimistic, and it's going to be bumpy for a while, and there will be negative outcomes for far too many people because of this. But I suspect the president wants to resolve this fairly quickly, maybe by summer, and just get this kind of off his to-do list. He is clearly looking for a whole series of bilateral agreements, not multilateral, not trilateral for, say, Canada and Mexico. We may get there, but in the immediate term, a series of bilateral agreements. We're already starting to see signals: Israel, Japan, maybe India. Seeing Southeast Asian nations, Thailand, Vietnam, coming to the U.S. this week with very serious offers that I'd be surprised if the U.S. didn't take advantage of. And then package those together into a big new deal, trade deal for the United States, declare that as victory, and then leave it to trade officials to work out the details. But the United States and the president have a whole bunch of other issues to address. So I suspect he'll want to have this consume less oxygen, if you will, and that will require de-escalating, particularly that confrontation with China, first and foremost, but then getting this into the hands of the negotiators who will bring more certainty to it.
So totally in the same track, but a little bit different. DOGE is taking out the administrative, what they in the U.S. consider as burden. And here in Canada, when we look at the political landscape, we have one of the parties who is talking to, if elected, they would look at the same model. Let's look at the federal public service, and do we need as much infrastructure in play? Relative to all of these strategic maneuvers currently in the U.S., from reduction of internal staff, and from a food perspective, you start looking at the food safety components, all these elements linking in, the production side. But is that a factor in when you look at the markets and you look at some of the decisions? Can you go too far in reducing the public service? And does it cause a problem for business in the end?
Yes and yes. Every time I deal with government, I always think, do you really need 5 people there when maybe 3 would do? And you could probably say the same of most large.
All the government people listening, you know, we do love you though.
But if it's the 3 out of the 5, you really need those 3.
Yeah.
Like whole systems depend on those proverbial 3 out of 5 people or whatever the number is.
Yep.
And bad things can happen. Food safety is a great example if we go too far. Yep. But I mentioned the need for trade negotiations. Canada has a terrific kind of force of trade negotiators. We're going to need them working 24/7 for the foreseeable future. I think they know this and they're game for it, but we got to have their backs to go in. I worry a bit about on the U.S. side of it going too far, and there literally not being anyone on the other side of the table. So when the president and his team get to that point where they have what they feel is kind of the shape of victory, and I think they can get there fairly quickly with a big question around China, but they should be able to get there quickly. Who's going to do the implementing?
Yeah. Even the collection of tariffs right now.
Then you get to the border.
Yeah.
I mean, the poor border officials who suddenly have, kind of like a new universe.
Yes.
Presented to them. Someone quoted to me the current tariff list for the United States is roughly around 15,000 lines. If the U.S. went to or gets to universal tariffs around the world on every product, that goes to 3 million lines.
I heard the same numbers. Yeah.
I pity that customs official.
they
pity all of us because
they may just all retire. No, exactly. So you mentioned China. China is reacting to the tariff threat. Again, significantly coming out swinging. I think you are going to see other markets, while some are coming to the table to negotiate, others are retaliating. I want to talk a little bit about the Canadian retaliatory, but on the global level, is the retaliatory modeling sustainable as a business framework? Or is that the lever that does drive recessionary modeling into a 2-year window? Or is it a shorter horizon?
If you have these structural changes, investment being pulled back, the recession will be deeper and longer.
Yeah.
As opposed to right now, it's just it's fear.
Yeah.
Both for the consumer and business. Fear can become hope fairly quickly, just as hope became fear fairly quickly. But if you have a restructuring of investment, that will prolong the challenge. I think it's some key questions with respect to China, which probably none of us can claim to fully understand. One is political ambition and political timelines. The regime in China obviously has a much longer timeline than any elected government anywhere, but that includes the United States. The pain threshold is probably greater in China among ordinary citizens than it is among the United States. I don't say that with any glee. It is a country that is probably willing, top to bottom, to make more of a collective sacrifice as well as an individual sacrifice to get to a better outcome. I don't think that's restricted to authoritarian countries, by the way. I think we're seeing that in Canada start to take shape, that Canadians are saying, actually, we are willing to give up certain things. We'll see that maybe unfortunately tested. Yeah. But that's something the United States needs to think through versus what is the typical American willing to give up. Are they willing to pay 10%, 20% more for Christmas gifts, for clothing, for processed food that comes from elsewhere? So I'd be surprised if they are. And that may be what China is gaming, is just this expectation that we can go longer at this and deeper than you. This is terrible, right? Yeah. Because people in both countries suffer, and the people who will suffer most are the ones who have the least privilege to speak into these conversations, to affect policy, unless they get a chance occasionally at the ballot box. Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting. I was in D.C. recently and met with a former trade negotiator in the Trump administration the first time through. And I asked the question on pain threshold, because I think you hit it right on the head relative to how much empowerment does the president have to go as far as he thinks he needs to go. And what was interesting is the comment back was, it's very, very far.
just based on the electoral base that put him into power and his views on that opportunity to what he thinks is the right change to put in play, regardless of what the rest of the world is thinking, regardless of what we're seeing in the market. So it's interesting when you start seeing, is it a game of chicken between China and the U.S.? And really, at the end of the day, who's going to flinch first? No one, crystal ball, no one knows. I don't know.
We'll state the obvious. We'll see, and also who has the most allies in this. And both countries have probably isolated themselves more from key allies than they should have. Canada's a case in point. We all have seen the anti-American mood sort of grow in this country, and I think that can shift fairly quickly. But China should be aware of the lack of goodwill or the goodwill it has lost in Canada over the years, and I'm just speculating, may sort of regret that now. Of like, well, we had a kind of a long time friend there on many things that now is much frostier. And Canada's not alone in that. So I think both countries kind of need to think about allyship. As I mentioned earlier, we live in a world of two dominant economic powers. But there's also a whole bunch of the rest of us that make up the other half of global GDP and much more than half of the global population who will lean into this in different ways. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit. So right now on the Canadian retaliatory modeling, we heard on the automotive side for the fruit and vegetable industry, March 4th, the Canadian government implemented their $30 billion strategy on food, on retaliatory, which they have not rescinded as of yet, which actually from a CPMA perspective, we've been lobbying as always to have a tariff-free environment and don't want to see in our integrated markets tariffs on either side of the border. So we're actually encouraging the Canadian government to remove those tariffs because there are no active tariffs by the U.S. on Canadian products at this point. So the reality is, how do you see the tariff modeling from a Canadian perspective? What's the track and how do we or should we react to it?
So we are, first of all, let's understand we are in a better position than most other countries. There are a few others that also have sort of a good runway ahead, but not many. So let's not lose that, number one. Secondly, we are near the front of the line for some sort of bilateral agreement, but also an off-ramp for the U.S. And unlike any other country, we can sit down with the U.S. and talk about not just our economic interdependencies, but our security interdependencies, what we do with each other in the Arctic, at the border for North America, but also out there in the world. So the U.S. has more than economic interests at play here to rebuild a partnership with Canada. That can either come all at once or bit by bit. I would suspect it's going to be bit by bit, just given the nature of this president and also all the other negotiations that the U.S. is going to have to deal with. So how do we put the most important things at the front of the line for us if we're sitting down with the administration? And energy and food, agri-food, more broadly, are two keys. Now, we need to hold those back for leverage. There's a value in that, but at the same time, have a constructive dialogue of saying, like, we do not want to punish Americans or Canadians on the most essential things in their lives, which is food and energy. So how do we get that off the table and then start to build those other opportunities? I'm
going to talk in the agri-food industry.
And I should say, we've heard from the president very, very clearly, and I've heard this privately as well. He is really focused on steel and aluminum, autos, lumber, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors.
And you're missing one. Our sacred cow in the Canadian industry. How about supply management?
Off and on that.
Oh, really?
But those are the big five, which he says repeatedly. Lots of other things can be tussled over.
Right.
That might be one of them. Doesn't mean it's a free pass.
Right.
But those are strategic to the United States. Steel and aluminum, autos, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors are part of national security. So that gives us strength, flexibility, and strength on agri-food.
So it's interesting, right? Because we always say, don't throw the agri-food industry under the bus relative to other sectors at any negotiating. When we renegotiated NAFTA, now CUSMA, USMCA, I think at the end for the produce industry, other than maybe the dispute resolution mechanism, it's a good tool still. But let's go back to the supply management. Let's say it comes into play. Is there a mechanism or challenge for us? And I don't want to get political on the food side in Canada, but that could be that one area where, it's a divisive discussion even within the Canadian agri-food industry. Do you have any thoughts on how you can navigate it?
Well, we know the president is very good at creating fissures, dividing and conquering. He sees weakness and has had a lot of success in his life with this approach, and it's clear how he goes at these things. Yeah. If he is able to hive off a weakness or create division, he'll do that.
Yep.
And do that with the weaker partner, which we obviously 10-1 are in this negotiation. So I think you're making a key point that as Team Canada, we have to lock arms.
Yep.
But then it's more than a symbolic of locking arms. How do we think constructively about reforms? And every sector in every economy has room for reform. How do we kind of map out the irritants to our most important trading partner?
Yep.
Some of them justified, some of them a little more politicized. Say, okay, that's their concern. That's their irritant. Rather than keep saying you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Not a great way of going at negotiations when you're the smaller partner. Say, okay, we hear you. There's a concern there. Maybe we see it differently.
Yeah.
But it's in our interest as well to improve the efficiency right across the economy.
Yep.
But in supply managed sectors specifically, if that is a proclaimed irritant, say how do we take advantage of this crisis to maybe do some of the things that the sectors want to do to improve their efficiency, improve their productivity, improve their long-term prosperity, and also help reduce this uncertainty. I think the sectors are up for that, but we have to be wide-eyed and also put our collective resources behind getting to those solutions.
So I know we're spending a lot of time on the U.S.-Canada relationship, specifically on the Trump administration, and because it is in the background, it's in the front, it's everywhere around us. Currently, we're seeing strategies within the Trump administration and agri-food. Previously, and I'll give you an example, when the previous focus on foreign labor coming into the country in the U.S., agriculture wasn't really looked at. ICE was not targeting farms. They weren't going in, pulling workers. It's a different game now. And how is that? Does that have a ripple effect through production and that North American framework that we're so used to?
Yes. I haven't seen numbers on it recently, but it's not just classical farm labor, but in the slaughterhouses, in the processing plants. This is work most Americans don't want to do, and will not do even at substantially more wages if those came along. I suspect the administration, but also levels of the federal and state governments fully appreciate this. This is the heartland. And if they start seeing meatpacking plants shut down because of lack of labor, that I think they'd adjust to fairly quickly. That's not really what they're targeting.
No.
But we in Canada, I think, have an opportunity here with still relatively free flow of goods across our border, with a more, let's say, a different approach to both immigration and workforce, and one that generally works for the country with lots of room for improvement. That's an opportunity for us to continue to invest in the sector and build on it. With a question, and I hope we'll get to this because we did our big food
I want
first
to talk about your food first report.
We've developed a greater dependency as an agri-food exporter on the U.S. than I think most Canadians and maybe even people in the sector appreciate. It's been great. We've had a really good 25-year run. Over the next 25 years, we probably want to be more aggressive in ensuring that our agri-food exports are getting to the U.S. for sure, but getting to many other markets in greater numbers than they have been.
So let's dive into that. So for listeners, if you aren't aware, great report, Food First on Canada's export growth potential. some of those key findings that John, you're mentioning, right, are key for exponential growth for our industry. But is it going to be easy? What are some of the things that you found?
No, it's not easy. But the cliche of never let a crisis go to waste. I think we need to be as ambitious as we can be in this crisis. One is cleaning up our own house, as I said, right across sectors, all sorts of room for reform. Look what we've done with interprovincial trade barriers in weeks, done more than in many, many years before that. How do we take the same eagerness towards some sectoral reforms and ensure that the fiscal investments that governments are making, which are quite significant, that we just don't throw money at people, which is what we did in the pandemic. And we all, with hindsight, know the inefficiency of that. Yep. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have done anything, but we could have done it a lot better. Right. So learning from that, how do we do this a lot better and ensure that the billions of dollars that the federal and provincial government is now ready to put, or are now ready to put on the table, isn't just sent out as a blank check that then just goes into consumption. How do we use this as true investment in productive reforms on the production side of the economy? Agri-food is critical for this. One of the biggest export opportunities for us when we talk about trade diversification, one of the best opportunities for us, but it's going to take several years of investment. It isn't, there's some quick things that can be done, absolutely, but the longer term stuff, especially on infrastructure, we need to get going on today, but that's going to be a number of years before we see the return. And that's okay. We just need to remind ourselves, selling into the U.S. has been great. Hopefully it continues to be great. Selling to Asia and Europe and other markets just takes a longer-term mindset. So you're kind of leaning into the Canadian global competitive framework. Are we doing okay? Are we slipping? Because I know I travel the world. I see where, Northern Africa, Spain, Morocco, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia. Like I can just keep going in. They are investing. They are in market. And our old argument of, hey, we sell a perishable product. Yes, it's easy. We ship it across the U.S. border. It's quick markets there. Is that an excuse anymore? Like, do we need to look bigger? Oh, yes, I absolutely. And we are slipping. We did some modeling with BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, and the RBC Thought Leadership Group. And thanks for flagging the report. If you want to find it, just Google RBC and Food First or RBC Thought Leadership, and you'll get to the landing page and get the report by my colleague Lisa Ashton, who is a terrific asset for RBC, a PhD from Guelph in ag science. So good, very fortunate to have her on our team. But the modeling that Lisa and our team did with BCG showed we've fallen from 5th place to 7th place globally as an agri-food exporter. On current course, we will end up in 9th place within a decade if we do nothing. The rest of the world's getting better, and the rise of the rest it's on. This isn't just manufacturing where we're seeing the rise of the rest. It's in agri-food. And we are now competing not just with the United States, but with Brazil and Argentina, but lots of others who are going to be the next Brazil and Argentina. So it is game on. We hope that is a signal, if not a warning, to Canadians to invest in, let's start with infrastructure. Our ports are not equipped for the current global economy. I got to spend time with a Japanese delegation, a senior delegation a couple of years ago, who had come to Canada and said, this is what we as a country think we're going to need by 2040. Just love the Japanese long-term thinking. And it was like natural gas, it was potash, it was all sorts of agri-food products. And they said, we would love to get this from Canada. You've got high quality, you're good to deal with. When we have disputes, we resolve them. We're just not sure we can count on you. My God, this is the world saying to us, we don't know if we can count on you. He said, you've got 2 rail lines. You've got a port that gets flooded. We need to ensure we have food security, and we want Canada to be part of that. So let's listen to our customers. led by the Japanese to say, like, okay, let's invest in our ports. Let's invest in inland terminals.
Yep.
Let's invest in rail expansion, including just of the rail lines and the capacity that we can have. And then let's start to think more out into the future. What sort of northern ports can we and should we develop? We're blessed with 3 kind of exit points for our exports. That's pretty fantastic. How do we have that three-way investment strategy?
So you mentioned don't waste the crisis, right? And I know political landscape, we're hearing, well, let's face it, it's really a 2-party race now with the Liberals and Conservatives in Canada, and we're starting to hear a lot of talk about that infrastructure investment. Time will tell on what happens there, but I think you're spot on. It's not going to be an overnight solution, but now is the time I think we have to hit home on, the multiple port options. And I think your comment on, are we reliable? When we work as an association, working with our partners in the shipping line, the terminal operators, working with some of these shipping lines globally, the first comment is, we don't like landing in one of the multiple ports in Canada. We don't know if we're going to get in and get out on time. Like, how do you do business when you're operating like that? Anyways, that's just a ray of sunshine. But
to your point about the political landscape, I think this is a really important moment for the agri-food industry to come together and really stress this case. Look at what the oil and gas sector, and good on them, have been able to do in terms of building bipartisan support, FedProv, right across the country for oil and gas infrastructure. That's taken a lot of hard work by the whole sector.
Yep.
And they don't take it for granted. They'll have to continue to invest in that. How do we, and put ourselves in that we, draw as much attention to the agri-food infrastructure that is needed? I try to stress wherever I can, back to my point about Pearson Airport.
Yep.
Does anyone think about Pearson Airport as a really important gateway for our food or for our agri-food exports? Because it is. It's not just for people going off on sun vacations. How do we get governments thinking, okay, that is a really critical piece of economic infrastructure?
Yeah.
And how does the sector help governments see that?
Totally agree. So talking through, I want to dive into one big sector in our market, and that's greenhouse, right? It's one of our largest components in the Canadian produce supply chain, and it's significant potential. Now, and you've done a lot of work looking at the greenhouse market. What are your thoughts? Where can it go?
Huge opportunity. We did another report, which you can find at RBC Thought Leadership, on the greenhouse revolution. And Lisa and I spent time in Leamington, which is just awesome. Like, Canadians should see that. It's amazing what the community and sector has built there in a fairly short, relatively short period of time. And they can 5x that fairly easily. How do we help them? And it's not just the Leamington crowd.
No,
see the opportunity. They see the opportunity. How do we help them seize the opportunity? Yeah. There are some thorny decisions, and easy for me to say as an outsider, as opposed to a local resident. But these can be resolved when we look around the world, which our study did at other countries. So we all know about the Netherlands, but what Spain has done in the same period of time, I'm impressed with Leamington. Spain has done 10, 20 times as much in the
steroids.
In the same period of time, and are feeding Europe because of that. So how do we study the Spanish model, and it's not just Spain, and apply that to the parts of Canada that are ready to go?
Yeah.
We need to ensure that we have trade access, because most of that produce literally is going to go to the U.S. That's to America's benefit.
Yeah.
I got to spend time with a private equity investor a few months ago. It was just before the Trump inauguration, who had invested, I won't name the firm, it's a big American firm, invested heavily in Peru, particularly in blueberries. So many of you can guess who this is. Doing great. And flying blueberries, which I always find that's really curious. I buy my blueberries. I love Peruvian blueberries, but think, wow, this came by an airplane. That's kind of weird.
Yeah.
As I'm eating my cereal with blueberries. How do we do that? And he had not thought about Canada as a production center now is, but it just gives you an insight into the capital pools out there that are looking. And Peru, helped them see the opportunity, and they have fields now of greenhouses to produce those blueberries. How do we be more economically ambitious, ensure that there's the energy supply? So there's a natural gas question there, that there's the land availability, but also that there's that infrastructure, including going across the Gordie Howe Bridge into the U.S. In a timely manner, because you don't want a truck full of blueberries.
But, it's funny.
It's a traffic jam.
Great that you brought up Peru, and that they are, at our national event in Montreal, they're a country sponsor. And I think this is even bigger. So you look at the private equity investment, you look at the national investment in the sector. And I think that's what's interesting. When you look at that global commitment internationally, you have the government of Peru actually saying, you know what, Canada's a big market. We want to come in here. We want to drive our brand, right? We want to invest, and we want to build that public-private partnership, not only working and seeing enabling private equity into the business, which we're starting to see exponentially grow quickly across the produce sector. But now governments are figuring out. Now the question is, governments in other jurisdictions. Has the Canadian government in your mind really looked at you? You mentioned at the very start, we're an economic engine, but we see it. Is the government of Canada seeing it?
Not ambitiously enough. Unfortunately, and I spent a lot of time with the ag department, but ag department's plural, and they're fantastic people, super smart and committed, but it doesn't at the highest levels have that economic ambition. I've often said, and some people don't receive this the right way, but why isn't ag part of, not sure it should be called the industry department, but the economic strategy department? Like ag should be core to that. We think about car manufacturing. We think about steel and aluminum as great economic assets that we have to protect at almost all costs, that we have to develop federal, provincial strategies to help expand. We should be doing absolutely the same with agri-food, and seeing the opportunity, say in greenhouses, to develop, ensure that federal funding, that research money, that tax strategies align with the provinces, not just for the not just for the prosperity of the producer, which is fundamental, but for the economic strategy of the country. So maybe voices like this here can continue to shout, but to help federal and provincial governments see ag as an economic opportunity.
So wrapping up, for the listeners and trying to understand, what does the next 10 years look like? Like for agri-food, what's your track? What do you see in the future?
Lots of growth. Lots of growth. And shame on us if we cannot grow agri-food by 20% over the next decade or so, because we have the land, the water, the inputs. We do have the trading relationships, even with all the frictions we have today. We're better positioned to be selling into the U.S. market and all sorts of other markets, Europe, right across Asia than most countries. We have the talent across the country and right through the supply chains to innovate and to grow. We have to invest in infrastructure. We have to be out there selling agri-food exports much more than we are. Our report also shows how little we do compared to Australia, for instance, in terms of having our trade service. Wonderful people, just not enough of them focused on ag, selling that in other markets. And then lastly, we have to encourage generation after generation to get into the agri-food business. We did a report called Farmers Wanted. We are on the precipice of a crisis, a shortage of farmers in the country. That's an urgent concern, but it's not just the farmers. We need the food innovators, and you can be in the agri-food sector working here in downtown Montreal, doing wonderful things, working with the farmers out in Saskatchewan or wherever they may be, and bringing that sort of end-to-end ambition to agri-food would be great for Canada.
Now, on a global, I said we were going to wrap up, but I want one more toss for you here. On a global perspective, what I'm hearing, and I chair a group called the Global Coalition for Fresh Produce, which is a group of 10 different allied associations looking at supply chain challenges and how do we find solutions. What I'm hearing here in a Canadian model and talking about the trading environment and the dynamics, is it transferable on the global market? Like, I know on a macro level, everyone has their own unique micro level or domestic challenges. But what I'm hearing is sounding very similar to a lot of other conversations I hear around the world. Do you think there's some transfer that our listeners can say, all right, yeah, I'm hearing Canadian, but this makes perfect sense to me back home in Europe or in South America?
No, I absolutely. And let's be aware that the world's food imbalance will be greater 10 years from now than it is today. Yeah. Just the numbers show this. We already have food shortages right across the world, but China is getting into a worse and worse situation there. That's an opportunity for us if we can develop a better trading relationship. But the food producers of the world will need to produce much more food a decade and 2 decades from now than they are today to feed that growing world. Yep. So we're going to have to. We can't just do what we're doing now. That's not a good approach to innovation. So we need more innovative models, more technologies, and there's so many extraordinary technologies just emerging in Canada. How do we not just talk about it? How do we sell that to the world? So also a great opportunity for Canada to be an ag tech leader and not just buy what's coming out of the U.S. or elsewhere, and then show to our friends and partners around the world that this is how we can do, and happy to sell you some of the know-how in getting that done. That's great.
Well, John, thank you. Thanks for being part of the CPMA podcast and sharing, the wealth of experience you have, the support that RBC has for the agri-food industry, the produce industry. Really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you, and let's grow together. This is a really inspiring conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you.